let me welcome everybody and welcome you to the Future Trends Forum. My name is Brian Alexander. I'm your host and cat herder for this experimental session today, and I'm very glad to see you here. We are trying something new, and I'll explain how it works in just a minute. But first, let's introduce the forum, where it comes from, who supports it, and where it's going. So, Ella, over to the next slide, please. First, you should know that the forum is the video conference social expansion of the Future Trends in Technology and Education report. The FTTE report is a monthly trends analysis that does an environmental scan of changes in education and technology with an eye to how they'll play out for the future. We've been tracking multiple trends in there. In fact, Ella, try the next slide. We've been tracking a lot of trend lines, and we've been following them for a while, so we have a good sense of what's building up and what's weak. So we have a pretty interesting way of looking at the future of education. If you haven't had a chance to take a look at this before, go to ftte.us. The most recent report just came out yesterday afternoon, in fact. Now, you should also know that although I'm coming to you from the United States, and several of the people in the crowd right now are from the US, the forum is a really international group. And you can see that because, among other things, we have Jonathan being very brave, speaking to us at 4 o'clock in the morning, Australia time. But it's important to think about this, that higher education and technology are not nationally focused. They are truly transnational. So it's very participation, discussion, reflection, thoughts, and ideas from all over the world. And you can see from this map that we've had participants from New Zealand, India, Japan, all over Europe, South America, Russia, all across North America. And we hope to continue that as we go forward. Now, next slide, please. Now, we can only do this with the help of some very kind sponsors and supporters, and I want to thank them and invite you to join them. First, we have NICE in New York State that helps network that state's colleges, universities, and libraries. We're grateful to them for their support of FTTE. We're also very grateful to Shindig, because Shindig provides support on two very kind levels. One is this technology we're using right now, and the other is the really kind of help us make everything work. And so today, you'll see in the room, that will be Ella and May, and behind the scenes, folks like Tara and Christopher. So we're really grateful for them. Speaking of which, the technology, let me just quickly show you a couple of the crucial features. I'm sure all of you have used video conferencing technology in different ways in the past. So let me just show you a couple of the unusual features of Shindig. So first, up here where I am and where, let me get this, where the slides are, this is called the stage. This is a kind of broadcast spot where everybody here can see and hear what's going on up here on the stage. You can join us and I'll explain how that works. But below us is what I think of as the participant swarm. This is where the audience, the participants, the group all get to meet. And you can see, if you look around, you can see either video feeds for, say, Greg and Kristen and Jeff and Fred, or you can see a silhouette, like in the case of Brenda. And as you watch, you'll see that people move back and forth slowly, like kind of like Brownian motion, which is pretty neat. If you are in the audience and you want to talk privately with somebody else, double click on their icon. If they're up for talking, your two icons will click together like Lego bricks and you can have your own private cone of silence, bubble conversation. Now, the other thing you should know is that there are many, many ways to participate. What I'm doing now, talking to you with slides, we're not going to do that. The idea here is to have conversation. And you have 4 different venues. And let me just show you how those all work. First, if you look in the bottom right corner of your screen, you'll see this little teal-colored strip with 3 different icons on it. The one on the left is an ask question. It's one with the circle with a question mark here. Click that if you'd like to type us a question or a comment. And so that will flash it on the screen, and I'll read it out loud so everyone can see and hear it. Now, if your mic and camera are working and you feel up to talking, click the raise hand button. And that tells us you want to come up on stage. And when the time is right, we'll shove some space over and up you'll come to join us. Easy to do, easy to do. We just want to note, when you join us on the stage, and I think you'll have time, everyone, to do that today, please just introduce yourself and say who you are. Now, if you're back to text, if you'd like to type in comments, just click on the chat box. That's a little IM box there. And there's a little chat room for the roughly 18 or so people who join you in this space. So Jonathan, Kristen, Tara, Fred, Greg, Dave, and other people right now, myself, all saying hello in one chat box. So you can do that. If that's not enough, head over to Twitter and just use the hashtag FTTE, and we'll be scanning that to see what people say. Okay, that's the technology. It sounds a little complex, but it's actually really, really easy to use. So Tara, over to the next slide, please. Now, the other source of support for this work is Patreon. So if you haven't seen Patreon, it's a crowdfunding source like Kickstarter. The difference is it supports creative people rather than projects per se, and it supports them on a subscription basis. So rather than a one-time donation, as you do with Kickstarter or GoFundMe, you sign up to be a regular contributor, a subscriber. And so you can see already right now, if you go to patreon.com/Brian Alexander, there are dozens of people who are contributing to keep the lights on so that we can keep this independent work going. So if you haven't had a chance to take a look, please do, and we'd be grateful for your contribution. Now, next slide. Well, for the slides seem to be stuck, I can say that, let me explain what we're doing today. Today is an experiment, so that we're doing something that we haven't done before. See all of you here to join us. The Future Trends Forum is about trying to grapple with the future of education with an emphasis on technology. And we've been doing this in a kind of crowdsourced way. We've had dozens and dozens of guests, upwards of 60 now. And we've had almost 2,000 participants, all contributing their thoughts, ideas, and conversations. This is unique in higher education. There is no other such socially based futures project. And we always twist it. We always give it a little spin each time. And what I'd like to do here is have, instead of a guest, instead of a report, I'd like to have each of us take turns identifying a single story from recent couple of weeks that suggests to you something about the future of education and technology. The story can be in a trade journal, the story could be a blog post, it could be an awesome podcast that you heard, even a book you read. It's something that's very recent. It's grounded in some reality that gives us something to look forward to for the future. It could be about any topic, everything from the LMS to demographics, to policy, to students, to specific technologies. So the way we're going to do this is I'm going to kick off with one such story and then ask you all to react. And again, you can react using any of those 4 participatory methods: Twitter, the chat box, coming up on stage, or typing in questions. And then I'll give the floor to you guys, where each of you can take your turn sharing one story. So over the course of the hour, we're going to develop a kind of collaborative or collective futures map of where we think education is going. So does that make sense? You guys have any questions or comments, or raise your hand, and we're ready to hear them. The fun thing that I want to recommend that you try, as you can see on the screen next to me, is a blue box, maybe teal colored, that has podium and the words "Join Podium." So if you click that, you can just pop right up on stage.
Hi, everybody. Hey, Brian. Thanks for having me, and hey, everybody. I see a lot of familiar names and small postage-sized versions of people I know. So I am Jeff Young. I'm an editor and writer at EdSurge, and I think this is a cool project, and I look forward to hearing what everyone else shares. I actually kind of had planned on something different, but there was something I heard on the radio yesterday that was on the NPR here. It was from the Aspen Ideas Festival, and it was Sherry Turkle, who I'm sure many of you here are familiar with her work. And she was talking, and she's done a lot of work. I guess her latest book is on how people aren't talking to each other enough because of technology. She's makes some argument for conversation, and that there's too much people retreating to screens, and that's affecting education as well as just about everything else in our society. And so she's a real social critic of technology. But she had a really interesting take about sort of the how the sort of current moment, and looking at how oddly technology, she made this, I'll try to summarize very, very quickly. It was like a long thing that I can click the link in here. I don't think there's a transcript, unfortunately, so it's like a listen later. But she made this argument that Donald Trump represents this kind of baby boomer president that comes from some kind of history, and she linked it to a long time kind of love of technology by folks, and looking to technology to fix things and make things and kind of smooth things over and correct society's ills, which I think what she was sort of arguing, that she started with a personal story of saying that she kind of felt like she as a student herself, like wanted to protest, but wanted to make it easy. And that she was arguing that people sort of took for granted politics and sort of made it a professionalized activity and separated it. So I just thought it was an interesting, I don't know if that's maybe not the right start for this, but I thought it really backed up and put in perspective both technology and sort of Silicon Valley ethos and some political kind of trends, not necessarily talking about policies of the current president, but really talking about how kind of public discourse got to where it is and how people were kind of what people's participation in society, I think, and citizenship was related to how we interact with each other and technology, I guess, to put it at that level instead of getting into some partisan fight that might not be productive. If that makes any sense.
That's fantastic. Can you hear me okay, Jeff?
Yes.
Oh, good. That's a terrific example. Sherry Turkle, everyone should know, is a major scholar in the digital field. She began in the 1990s as someone exploring the positive potentials of technology, and over the past 10 years or so has become a very vocal critic. And so for her, it's very interesting to raise. Does she use the word solutionism, Jeff?
I don't remember that, but it was certainly implied. I think it was similar. She used similar language of this kind of that technology will smooth over, make things frictionless, friction-free, and this kind of concept that we don't need conflict, that we can avoid conflict through technology, and so we can kind of have this very sort of smooth society that doesn't need to work out some issues.
It's weird to see Trump as the avatar of that.
I think, like I said, I think she was trying to not just jump into a partisan thing, but to sort of talk about where the sort of various movements are in social justice and social movements, and people's perceived sense that some of those are moving in a different direction because of the current administration.
Well, thank you, Jeff. This is a terrific one. We've got a significant statement by a major figure, and the link you've got has a quick summary with a couple of excerpts, but it's about an hour-long audio, so we're going to need time for that later on.
I know, sorry, it's not transcribed, but I just was listening to it on the radio myself. So.
Oh, here. Well, this is often a thing with audio too. But this is making without having heard the 55-minute talk. I mean, you're pulling on a few major trends. One is this idea that technology is de-skilling face-to-face people in face-to-face skills. People are no longer able to socialize and communicate. And the other is this idea of what some have called solutionism or technological solutionism, that we can simply apply technology to a non-technological problem to fix it. And that's a really interesting one. I'd be curious to see how she takes the generational argument too. You mentioned Trump as a boomer. It'd be interesting to see how she develops that. Thank you. That's just my quick response. Friends, do we have any comments, questions that you want to jump in on? Please, again, either type in the chat box or raise your hand to join us. Here comes Kelly.
Great. Hi. So this is a great forum. Thank you so much. So my name's Kelly Walsh. I'm Chief Information Officer for College of Westchester in White Plains, New York. I also run a website called Emerging Ed Tech and dabble in this the relationship between technology and education in a whole mess of different ways. And the conversation, what Jeff is saying about Sherry's talk is really raising to me this. One of the things that's been the biggest downside and frustrator to me lately about technology is that this explosive, growth of quote unquote information, has really created this problem that we seem to have, to some extent, in the Trump administration. We've seen it really kind of come to the fore even more, and that's that there's just as much misinformation as there is information. And I almost feel like we're in this trough in terms of the evolution of, the incredible possibilities that are opened by being able to connect with each other. Yet at the same time, we're hearing and we know how many people are not connecting, even though there's these great possibilities. And at the same time, it's so easy to put information out there, but now it's become really hard to differentiate what is true and what isn't. I have these fantastic arguments with one of my sons who will bring up one topic or another and be ridiculously learned in it, whereas most folks aren't, and we'll go down this rabbit hole in a good sense of trying to find out what is the truth, whether it's anything from climate change to Pizzagate to whatever it is. And on the one hand, it's amazing the wealth of content that's out there, but on the other hand, we are in this situation where it's becoming increasingly challenged because of that wealth of content to tell what's the truth. And then the worst part of it is that and this has always been the case, there's powers that know how to use that very well to push their own agenda. And that's probably one of the biggest messages I wish we could get students and young people to be aware of and to try and see through that. So just 2 cents that I was passionate about sharing.
I'm glad you did. And folks, you should know, among other things, that Kelly is a guru when it comes to the flipped classroom and blended learning. So he's someone that you should definitely stalk for those purposes. Jeff, as a journalist, do you want to take a response to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes to a conversation that I had with a college leader, the president of Goucher, Jose Bowen, on our It Search podcast that ran last week. About he kind of talked about the liberal arts education and traditional college education as an antidote to some of these kind of information voids and misinformation. And I think this is something where there is this sense that. But my reaction to that a little bit was, that having a college experience, he was arguing, it teaches people how to disagree with each other. It teaches people how to productively, how to change their mind and to be in a position where you are in a mindset of changing your mind and growing or thinking and evolving or whatever. This is the kind of, I think, traditional liberal arts humanities argument that people think, that people expect and dream that college can do. And I think it probably did that for a lot of us here in this forum. So the question, though, I have is how, and it's not really, it's more just a question, not to sound like I get to try to be as objective as I can here. So I'm just trying to think through it. It just struck me, though, as like not everybody can go to, this is the president of Goucher College. It's a very beautiful, beautiful campus outside of Baltimore, liberal arts college. And not everybody can go to that. So it's kind of, how do you scale kind of that information literacy and preparation for dealing with the internet when everybody has the internet? And I don't know if it's, I'm sure over the years there've been people talking about, I feel like a long time ago there was some sort of internet driver's license idea when the internet was still like AOL mailed to you on a CD. But it's almost like, and it starts to sound elitist, so I probably want to park that idea. But something to the effect of how do you, when you understand that this is everybody, that Facebook hit 2 billion people or whatever, that it's not some sort of this is a forum for everybody, and so how does everybody have access to a preparation that would and really, like, there are so many things outside of the internet that then come into play. So it's hard. I don't know.
I would just throw in that it's a shame that digital literacy, while it gets a lot of, there's a lot of talk about it, it's not a fundamental part of K-12, and it really needs to be. That's where it starts. Not to
Get ahead of ourselves, but in about a month, I'll be helping release a report on digital literacy. So, I'd like to hear. It's also the first global one too. We have 2 more folks who have their hands raised. Why don't we hold them up on stage, Ella?
So I just dropped something in the chat box for my room. I don't know how many people can see that. This is specifically, it's kind of jumping off of your point that you raised initially, Jeff, was what is sort of this overall trend that Sherry Turkle was highlighting. This one specifically is I noticed it in a column that John Warner in his column for Inside Higher Ed mentioned. It's called Hero 12, Education for the Authoritarian Age. And to summarize it, I think it's a fantastic article. People should read it. It's about 10, 15 minutes plus the little promo video for the slick educational technology that is highlighted here. But it's essentially, it's very straightforwardly, it is company that makes security systems and has a lot of interest already in K-12 schools. The passes and the gates you need to get through to get into a lot of K-12 schools. They said, "Oh, we'll pivot to become a company that now you can get." Rewards and demerits, and we can gamify the sort of tardiness process and the behavior process and generate reports and rewards and automate everything so that all these slips are printed out and the teacher doesn't even have to engage with the student when a tardiness occurs, and it creates this sort of veneer of equity. I found it totally bone chilling myself, and I definitely encourage people to read it. But I wanted to sort of pull this one quote out of it because I think it sort of highlights, I think, what happens a lot with these sort of solutionists. This is as one example of these solutionist things where somebody from one industry says, "Oh, that looks a lot like what I do at a very surface level. I will apply it here to education to solve this problem." And it often ignores something really fundamental. So I'll pull this quote from John Warner's article is, "Note the entire lack of human discretion within the system. We do not know or care why Jill arrives late, if her mother's car broke down again, or if perhaps there is a younger sibling needing escorting to school. What matters is not the individual, but the lateness itself, apparently a threat to the orderly, well-functioning school." And he also notes right there that this company's already raised $150 million this year from per Audrey Waters' tracking of higher ed tech investments. So I thought that was a really interesting example of this whole thing. So I'll get off, bounce off stage.
Sam, no, stick around for a minute. Where are you from?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm from UMass Amherst. I work in sort of ed tech stuff in UMass Amherst.
Very good. Are you in the library building?
Yep. I'm literally in the library building right now.
With that awesome makerspace on the 7th floor? Top floor, I think?
Third floor.
Third floor. I was really excited about that. Sam, this is a terrific piece. I just, Jeff, I grabbed a link to it and put it in one chat box. But this is a very, very important stuff because this ties into a few different things at once. One is the question of privacy and data privacy that we should be thinking about in terms of data analytics. Another is the use of big data in analyzing students as they go through education, not just academically, but as you said, in non-academic functions like being late and walking through the building. It also brings to mind the question of entrepreneurship and how we've got venture capital funding new technologies for education, so coming from the outside. And then on top of that, as you said, we have this solutionist idea where we've got people who by analogy are trying new technologies, but they don't necessarily fit in reality. What do you guys think about this? Jeff, do you want to take a whack at it, or should we let anybody else join us on the stage?
Yeah, I'm happy to respond, but I feel like I want to hear from other people as well. Thank you for sharing this story. I haven't seen it, so I'm looking through it now. If you don't have a soundtrack for this, Phil Katz just reminded us of the great lyric, "This will go down on your permanent record." Well, speaking of classic rock, hey, George, welcome aboard.
Oh, hi. Hey, how are you? Am I coming through okay?
Beautifully. Really good.
Okay,
sound.
Great. Thanks. So I had a couple of comments, if you don't mind me kind of veering back to digital literacies for a minute.
Please do.
Okay, great. Thanks. I guess, Brian, you dropped a hint there about what is to come. I was just going to suggest that it may be that the ocean liner's turning or the world is shifting back to be ready to talk about digital literacy again. By the way, I teach at Cal State Monterey Bay, and I used to teach a tech skills course for some years, and now I'm teaching a first-year seminar with the theme Technology and Society. So I'm interested in how we interact with social media and so on, and other online things. But in this case, digital literacies, I'm thinking that we went from an era where we were very concerned with information literacy, maybe from the library side and so on. We became less concerned with it due to the myths of the digital native and so on. And now, because of the external politics and so on, we're concerned again about issues of evaluating sources, which is knee deep in information literacy again. But we're calling it web literacy, or we're calling it something else now. But it all comes back around to whatever we call it, whatever terms we haggle over, fake news, whatever, right? We're concerned again, and I feel that the world's ready for, or the world of education, higher ed, is ready for the conversation again, ready for teachers and librarians to do something constructive to help their colleagues and students in this realm again. So between what Brian has recently done is work with New Media Consortium, and with what Mike Caulfield did with his web literacy ebook that's floating around. I don't have a link handy, but somebody can probably drop it in. And it feels like that we're ready to have that conversation again. And I'm feeling the local shift on my own campus, where people kind of didn't want to talk about it for maybe the last 4 or 5 years. Now everybody wants to go there again with it. So I think that's just a great thing.
Wow, that's a big movement. That's in many ways, I hope you're right. Not just because I'm working on it, but because I think that's very positive for people. And so digital literacy, again, we come back to that as a major issue. While we're trying to get another guest on stage, what do you folks think? Sam, do you want to take a run at that first? Anybody else want to chime in on Georgia's point about rising digital literacy?
Sure. I'll just mention that it's certainly been, it's bubbled up quite a bit in the conversation, that, it was present, but not quite as immediately present among the faculty I talked to. And specifically speaking of Mike Caulfield's book, people who have been like hungering for something, I can say, oh, okay, have you seen this book? It has very specific concrete examples, and they latch onto that because that's, I think they're what they're all looking for is, with everything else they're trying to do, they just want something that's simple and concrete, and as far as they are concerned, works, which is one benefit I think of his book, is it's fairly focused on a particular task, but it does highlight those concrete tasks and what step by step to take, rather than couch it in a sort of important theoretical context, but often one that I think sometimes stresses faculty out and makes them feel a little fuzzy. So I will give it just another thumbs up to Mike Caulfield's book. Which
can you tell us the title again, please?
Yeah, what is it called?
Okay. Someone will grab this in the chat box. This is a crowdsourced event.
Web literacy. The term web literacy is in it. I'm sure I could find it. So yeah, you can dump me off the stage here. At this point. I'm not trying to do it myself.
Get the hook. Drag him off. Thank you, Sam. And welcome, Vicky. Where are you today, Vicky Romano?
Hi. Well, I'm still in Eastern Oregon, but this will be my last joining you from Eastern Oregon. In a few weeks, I'll be joining you from Eastern Iowa. So.
Whoa! What's happening?
Things shift and change, and sometimes you just gotta take a deep breath and move a couple thousand miles. So.
Wow! Go east, young woman.
I am, and I'm going to do it with 2 dogs, a cat, and a sister. So.
Oh, wow. Yeah. You need a Conestoga. You'll be set.
Yeah, right? Yeah. So I'll be stopping at people along the way, but I think this point in K-12 we had a saying that was kind of cheesy, but it was, elementary school, you switch from learning to read to reading to learn. And I think that kind of could guide our technology talk. Even here and now, I still get the emphasis on, I need to know how to do this, and I want to know how to do that, and where do I click, and what do I do? And we've got to move beyond that, because what we're seeing is, a student is not going to have the problems they used to uploading a document to the LMS. Where I want to focus on time and training is, what can we do in our courses consistently and across, not just in student success first year seminars, but across the board, so that critical thinking and evaluating information is across the board. I think we get stuck in that. You hear from the upper level teachers, well, they don't know what they're doing and they're still using Google, and they don't talk to a librarian, they just look things up. We've got to get that part of the process in the beginning, because if we can teach that little bit of being critical and looking where your sources are coming from and making sure that the image that you find is a real image and not a doctored image, that the article you find is scholarly or popular, we've got to get those things going, I think, consistently, or we're just going to keep banging our heads, if that makes any sense. Like, the conversation has shifted even in the past year. The election is part of that, but the availability and access is part of that as well. I'm finding it on campus. I have never seen so many salespeople go directly to offices. IT is often the last to know when something's been purchased to be implemented. And so as that sale and that images, as those get more directly to people, and a lot of it is good and makes sense, but we've got to have a bigger picture for the resources that we have, because our resources are going to the stuff and the hardware and the software, and not the courses, the faculty development, and the implementation of pedagogy that can support critical thinking, is what I see. I'll let you know what I see in Iowa, but that's what I've seen over the past handful of time here.
Wow, just really quickly, let me thank you. That's a really deep set of comments. I mean, starting off with digital literacy and how it has to be programmed, not just an individual one-off, but something. You think about digital literacy across the curriculum, for example.
Yes.
And then you also mentioned something that I think we've touched on before. I could be wrong. This idea that vendors now are kind of outflanking central IT, and they're going directly to individual faculty, saying, "Well, how about this?" or "Why don't you use this?" And that's a different trend, and a very, very powerful one. I'm really glad you mentioned that. But what do you guys think of these trends and responses? George, please.
Sure. Because as faculty, I see some of that direct contact, and I always shoo people away when they contact me. And part of it is because I used to teach a course, and they get an old faculty list or something, where I taught a course that was more based directly in tech and infolit. And and it was co-taught with librarians, so they've got my name. And part of it is just that they're trying to get around to find somebody who has authorization to make a purchase, right? And the other thing I see, though, is that we are getting a lot of tech decisions being made on my campus without a lot of faculty input. And part of that, I think, is growing pains because we're a somewhat smaller campus. But part of it, I think, is also that re-siloing, if you will. We used to not have quite as many silos on my campus. Now we've got the silos, and it's like, oh, IT needs to decide that. Well, yeah, but check with some faculty first, right? So we have a little bit of that going on in our ed tech site. I think we're working with that and maybe evolving, but I know that it's a local issue. Not sure if anybody else is seeing that.
Well, welcome aboard, Anthony. Do you want to take a run at what George just said?
Actually, I was going to go back to what Vicky said, so I just wanted to second the idea that when we look at digital literacy, one of the things that, and we've seen studies about this, we actually saw it at the NMC conference as well, trying to teach students to do things differently doesn't work very well. So teaching them to learn is I think where we need to go. So students today, I'm a student today as well. I'm a grad student, and I Google things. I'm fairly young. I'm 34, and so when I don't know how to do something or want to check something, I Google it. There've been several studies around accuracy of Wikipedia compared to scholarly articles, and there's actually some evidence that in many cases they're actually more accurate. But I think it's teaching students to question things, to learn things on their own. And so that, the other trend we see is when students graduate, they're often not doing what they went to school for. So we have, computer science majors who are brilliant students, and they get hired by Facebook to develop one small portion of an app. We have engineers, we're an engineering school here at Purdue, and we have mechanical engineers that graduate, and they go and they, do one bolt design of an engine. And so, I think the key is teaching students to learn, and learn on their own and continue to learn and to question things. I mean, we saw that in the election as well. Sorry, George, to not add to your comments.
No, that's fine. I feel much better now because I just think I got to make a point in a way, and that still allows me to go back to campus next week. So.
Well,
Oh, you're not
and
on
also
campus
too,
now? This is in your office?
Yeah, it's great. I've got a bed and everything.
That's sweet. Yes.
well, I never
ahead,
too
Vicky.
thought I would have to tell a student to question what the White House is putting out or question what other yeah, you have to think critically, but it's an amped up level now in terms of just, and not to get political, but some of the things that were taken down off the White House site in the transition of administrations. I never thought that I would need to tell students, make sure you download that data before, just in case it gets taken down. Like those things that changed in the change of administration, that I didn't think of that. Like that wasn't in my wheelhouse, that data and pages would be taken down. I mean, I know how to find them if I want to, but again, those things that, and again, the administration, I mean, you know, more power to you. I guess you can do that. I question it, and I'll use my breath to say I don't agree with that. But I have to add that now to, well, if you search this site or if you search this data set, check the year now to make sure you're looking at, if you're looking at something that's current, it may not include something that happened before. It's that kind of amped up level that I have. It hasn't been part of my thinking. And if it hasn't been part of mine, that means I haven't, trained people or brought up the conversation on a campus. And so like, I have to keep up with these things to make sure that our faculty is getting beyond, how can I do this in Canvas, right? Like we have to move beyond, we have to teach the technical, but that can't be the focus anymore. Like we have to look at the bigger pictures. I'll pick you up on the technical, but if we can't get these bigger conversations, I worry about, and call it what you want, student success, retention, whatever it is. If I can't teach someone to teach critically, they're not going to, why would they stay in my class? Why would they want to be a part of this institution to do that, right? Where is it going to get them, and what will they have? So I think that's our responsibility at this point, to move to the critical, not, and again, not critical in judgment, but critical in thought and thoughtfulness. And I think that's a definition that I have to get better at saying.
Vicky, that's fantastic. If I could, we've got more people who want to join us. So
Absolutely.
I think George, we may have to just nudge you off. But you guys put in a couple of important things that I don't want to forget. One is Anthony. Forgive me if I get this wrong. You're talking about Purdue graduates who are thinking of the big picture, but then end up working on a single bolt. Right? So it may be that we have this problem of over specialization, and that part of digital literacy is reminding people to see not just the individual bolts, but that larger picture. Sam was mentioning the power of a book that would tell you about individual things you could do, which sounds really, really important. But we also have to add to that theoretical big picture armature so that people can actually see that larger context.
Sure.
We have Michael Berman also coming to us from California. Is that where you are today, Michael?
Yeah, I'm in Camarillo, California. It's lovely, going to be warm, but not humid.
Oh, that sounds.
I got silence my phone now on my stage.
I was going to say, you sound busy, but tell me, did you want to pounce on one of these comments, or did you have a story?
Well, I wanted to take the conversation up to an even higher level. I really appreciate what people like Vicky are doing and George, and trying to teach students how to look at and evaluate information and stuff from my call field. But you're big on trends. I just look at we're at a point in history that's both exhilarating and terrifying, because our notion of what authority has broken down. And I think we always depended much more on authority than we were willing to say, especially as educators, for what was truth. I mean, librarians made choices about what they did and did not put in the library. So if you went to the library to look up information, there's lots of things you just wouldn't find. You wouldn't find that the government is spraying stuff out of the back of airplanes that's changing people, or that Monsanto is controlling GMOs and making people sick, and that the president was born in Africa and not in Hawaii. I mean, all those things, that stuff was out there, but it was handed around person to person, and it wasn't in the library, and it wasn't in what were considered reputable sources of journalism. So, we went from the time when the church had all authority, when we went through the Enlightenment, and in the Enlightenment, it was places like universities and publishers and libraries that kind of had the final stamp of approval to say what was considered the official truth, and everything else was considered sort of crackpot and off on the side. And we've seen when we went through this revolution called the internet that we're going through now, that everyone could be a publisher, and that was exhilarating. Wow, everyone can be a publisher. Isn't that a wonderful thing? And it is a wonderful thing. But we haven't built the societal tools to keep up with that, and so we just don't have an agreed social norm for what truth is anymore. And I think and when you see that people not long ago were saying, well, go to the whitehouse.gov site. If you see it on the whitehouse.gov site, that means it has some authority. So we've reached a logical extension of that when people are saying, well, don't believe what's on the whitehouse.gov site, or check what was on it a year ago, because it might be different. So it's as I say, it's exhilarating and scary, but it's like nothing I've seen in my lifetime, and I've been around for a while. I come from a journalism background. My father was a newspaper editor, and he was one of those gatekeepers, and so I have a lot of insight into how that process worked, and also how seriously the people who were in that role took their role. Very much like librarians and faculty members, they were part of the establishment that decided what went through the gate and what didn't, and they understood what they were doing. They were not naive about it, and they believed they were doing something good for society and good for the world. And that's just not there now. And so I applaud everyone who's trying to teach students how to navigate in society, but I don't think anyone's got the answer yet.
That's a dark, dark vision, and a really, really scary one going forward. I mean, it sounds in many ways like what some saw happening with postmodernism. You've got critics saying that without truth, things are groundless, basically. So if you're going for that, but you're also invoking the downside of open publishing. Around 1998, I was teaching a class. 1996, on a writing class, and one of my students wrote a paper about new sources of power. And so she was talking about wind power and solar power, and then she mentioned crystal power. So I asked her for citations, and she said, well, the crystals are the kind that are found under Atlantis. They've been there for some time. And she gave me a couple of web pages. That was one of my first awakening to just how open the gates could be. Bob, welcome. Did you want to jump in on Michael's point, or did you want to add something else? And where are you today, Bob? Sorry.
I'm in New York today. Can you hear me okay?
Perfectly.
Okay. I want to start with Sherry Turkle and then come back to where we are at this moment in the talk. Sherry Turkle reminds me a lot of Sven Berkowitz.
Ooh.
Sort of brilliant analysis of what we are, of what is the best about the modes of communication in the current era. Sven really appreciated everything about print culture, and yes, he had no useful ideas for where we might go, but he was fabulous at elucidating what we had to be careful to bring with us if we could. And I think Sherry plays the same role in reminding us of perhaps what it is for us to be human and what we want to take with us. The problem seems to be that, and it's echoed in a lot of the comments I've heard so far, it is our inability as humans to place ourselves in a deep historical context. I mean, suppose it were the year 1500, 56 years after Gutenberg perfected the printing press. If you looked around Europe in 1500, nation states hadn't actually taken hold yet. capitalism hadn't happened yet, really. Our notion of the individual hadn't developed to where it is today. So here we are, 54 years into the digital revolution, or change, or era, whatever you want to call it. And frankly, we're unable. We're just not. We're just unable to imagine how things are going to change over the next several hundred years as digital works its way into the fabric of our culture. But the value, I think, that people who are doing the work we're doing can bring to this is to continuously try to understand what does it mean to be human, and how do we effectively that in the technologies and the modes of communication that we're developing. There's no answer. I mean, what it means to be human is going to change. But the question of what we want it to mean to be human, I think, is still a value. And it's one of those sort of contradictory dialectical arguments that goes on, right? We're right in clearly in the Trump era, right in the middle of a huge struggle of the past and the future. Sorry, I'll stop now, but thank you.
Oh, that's fantastic, Bob. And by the way, if you haven't, Bob is with the Institute for the Future of the Book. He was a terrific forum guest about a month and a half ago. That's tremendous. Michael, I don't know if I've ranted about this before too. There's a terrific journal issue of the Journal of the History of Ideas. It's from about 2003, devoted to information overload in the early modern era. So it's people from around the years 1400 to 1700. So right when Bob was talking about the Great Print Revolution. And so people were complaining about too much to read. And it's a fantastic issue because on the one hand, it's depressing. You think, oh God, they thought they had too much to read. But on the other hand, it's exhilarating because for years, this is ferment of invention, of people trying to figure out how to cope. This is where you get the cyclopedia and then the encyclopedia. This is where you get marginal notes that are totally rebooted. This is where you get a whole series of scholarly apparatus added. It always gives me a maybe not comfort, but inspiration for thinking about our practical collaborative reading that Bob has been pioneering, social writing, as we say Wikipedia. So I'm grateful for that historical framing. Just a quick question, Bob. Do you think for the long now is helpful in trying to get us to think about the next few hundred years? Or Long Now Foundation, excuse me.
I don't have a strong opinion.
Okay.
I mean, the Institute for the Long Now, there's a lot of people. Some of them I think are really interesting. Some of them I think are the problem, not the solution.
Very good. Thank you. We have some questions in the text box. One from Australia. Ella, can we pop that up from 4 a.m? This is brave Jonathan Nadler, who really is coming at us from 4 a.m. in Australia. It says, is digital literacy even an issue for the majority of learners still, though? Or is it important mainly to us and keeps focus too much on tech, not where it fits into bigger picture skills, i.e. problem solving? That's an interesting question, John. Bob, do you want to take a run at it? Or, of course, anybody else who wants to pounce on it? Again, use either the chat box or click the join podium over here, or type in a question. John, in my research over the past year, one of the things I found is that there's a lot of curiosity and interest across campuses for digital literacy. However, there are very, very, very few programs that are actually doing that at anything beyond the level of individual faculty or individual staff. We just lost Amy. We're trying to get Amy Collier on. So I think in many ways, the majority of learners aren't really experiencing that. Maybe they're getting a form of information literacy when they work with the library, or maybe they're getting from some faculty a form of media literacy. But beyond that, not too much. And we do have to be afraid of it becoming a question of technological solutionism. Friends, we only have 8 more minutes to go, and there's a ton of questions bubbling up. who would like to join us on stage? Who would like to share another news story from the past month that illuminates something about the future of education and education and technology? I had about 60 stories I wanted to share, but I would rather let you guys do it instead. Thank you for the note, Anthony, about the University of Florida study. And we're trying to get Amy on, but we're having some technical difficulties on her end. So let me come back to this question about larger scale stories that are beginning to change. I just want to mention one, a major scholarly work that was based on some simulations done across a series of massive databases about climate change and its possible impacts. And one of the things that's fascinating about this is that these studies are geographically based. So they're able to find that if we project forward over the next few decades, where climate change is going to fall out across North America, that the most destructive sides would fall from Texas to Virginia, i.e. across the classic South. And that, as one of the scientists involved put it, the South will get clobbered. I think this is important for a variety of reasons, and I'll put a link to it in the chat box. One is that it has huge direct implications for educational institutions. Keep in mind that almost 50% of high school graduates come from the American Southeast. And we have a wide variety of universities, colleges, museums, and libraries there. We have a quote here that I want to throw in from George Station, and we'll bring in Lisa in just a second. George advises us that the digital term scares off some faculty, even young faculty, e.g. humanists who don't want to do digital humanities, and he's seeing this. George, why, if you could just quickly answer when you get a chance, why do you think that's still happening in 2017? Good question. Lisa, your mic is muted. You need to unmute it.
Yep, I was just waiting for you to finish. So,
oh, beautiful! Thank you.
Yeah,
welcome.
Great. So I actually was camera challenged, but fortunately the Shindig people saw me frustrated and figured that out. So I thought one thing, I guess I'm itching to add to this conversation because I love all this great, like, oh, the library was great and it was, they did such a good job collecting and students could really rely on it. And I work in a library and I'm thinking, I remember in 1993 when I was becoming a librarian and we didn't have the internet and we spent all kinds of time talking to students about evaluating information to make sure that they got the good sources because not everything in the library was high quality. So I get a little concerned that we're romanticizing the print world, the collections, the work we did there, and forgetting that we actually put a lot of effort into these same issues. And I'm thinking even about things like, oh, the government documents that disappeared. Well, the field of librarianship has a whole cadre of people, government documents librarians, who devote their lives in the print world to making sure that government documents didn't disappear. And in fact, in the print world, there was federal government depository librarian activism because the federal government would try and recall documents that had been sent out to libraries to say, oh, we don't want that in libraries, it turns out. So I think it always worries me when I hear this sort of like, never before in this new time, because I think we then also run the risk of losing the lessons and the skills and the strategies that we developed in those times that weren't so different. And so I'm going to leave it with this kind of provocative thought for myself, which is I'm wondering if the literacy or the who's really being challenged by sort of today is almost more of those of us who are in that instructor role.
Oh, Lisa.
So, because I'm hearing a lot of us sort of sounding like we're really struggling, like it's so different, and we don't hear that struggle in our students in the same way. So, is there an interesting thing going on there too?
Oh, I wonder if we can connect that with Jeff's point about the Sherry Turkle speech about generations again. It'd be interesting to really reverse that.
Potentially, yeah.
There's a great passage in The Fairy Queen, the wonderful Renaissance epic poem, where our hero, the knight, is fighting a giant dragon, and the dragon is beating him. The dragon rears up and opens his jaws and spews out books. Pamphlets, books, broadsides, chapbooks all over the place. I mean, it's an allegory, so you get the idea. But
Yeah.
hundreds and hundreds of years ago, we were thinking about this. I think you're so right to remind us of our history. And I think, if I may be a fanboy again, the librarians are such custodians of that tradition and knowledge. Don't. That's a fantastic point to bring up, but don't go away, because we have a text question from Roxanne. Ella, can you flash this up, please? We need to have outside of the traditional library building informational experiences. These are new tools like VR, AR, and MR. Do you want to take a whack at that, Lisa? And then we have time for one more comment.
Sure. I mean, as the person who organized the panel at the last Coalition for Networked Information session on artificial intelligence in the information environment, and what does it mean when the people reading the books are actually computers, and vice versa. I mean, I couldn't agree more, including, I was one of the librarians back in the heyday of Second Life who said, we need to get into Second Life and figure out this environment. And people are like, well, Second Life isn't going to stay. And I was like, my point isn't that Second Life is going to stay. My point is that we are going to have virtual reality. So when we have virtual reality, I and my librarians are going to be ready to be librarians in that environment, which is really different than saying, oh, this is it. It's saying this is coming. And I think that's the futuring work that I'd really like us to kind of even more focus on, which is, what do we do today so that we meet the future as opposed to sort of always reacting to it. I feel like we're often in this very reactive mode, like, oh, Trump happened, so what do we do? Or, oh, this happened, what do we do? And we may not know exactly what's going to happen, but we can sort of say there's some possibilities, and can we prepare for those?
I wonder if that's a subject for a session to come. Lisa, don't go away. We need to bring up Greg Britton, who has a story that he wants to share. And thank you, Lisa. That's a great comment. Ella, can we teleport Greg up? Let's see if this works. Drum roll, please. And we have hooray, Greg.
Hey, Brian. Great to see you. The story that I found fascinating this morning was a really prosaic one in Times Higher Ed. It was on the barrier to pedagogical innovation, why teachers aren't taking more risks. And what I found is the reason teachers don't want to take a risk is they don't want to look stupid. And I thought, it's come down to this. We have all the tools we need, and it's academic hubris that keeps us from wanting to take chances. It's not a fear of failure, but a fear of looking dumb. This is something that I've gotten over years ago. I'm sitting here talking to you, but I don't know. It's kind of amazing that it's come down to that.
Well, you should. By the way, Greg is coming to you from Baltimore.
I'm sorry. I'm from Johns Hopkins University Press, Baltimore, Maryland.
Yes. The oldest and, in my mind, most formidable of all university presses. And Greg is the chief leader of a wonderful line of books on critical university studies.
We are dragons spewing books.
Yes, you are. A fine dragon indeed with fine books. In fact, we're going to have one of the authors of that series coming up in a few weeks as a guest. That's a great issue. Greg, do you think that now, where we're in a controversial time where expertise is perhaps less valued, do you think that faculty will feel that fear of being foolish even more sharply? Or do you think it'll be...
I just finished reading Tom Nichols' book, The End of Expertise, which I really recommend. It's published by Oxford University Press. A fantastic look at how we no longer value the expertise that we've earned, that all opinions are equal and deserve equal airtime. And it's a really frightening look at at this sort of disintegration of expertise. it's a book I'd recommend.
Well, thank you. That's another book that we need to pursue. I used to think we would have a giant bibliography, but I think what I'm going to end up doing is setting up an Amazon store, because we're going to have so many good titles. This may be that we have a war for the value of expertise, and faculty will feel it, that they're fighting it every day. And if they're going to try using GIS or Piazza or whatever, they may feel that extra pressure, that they're not just confronting their students, but they're confronting populist dislike.
The fact is that this is what universities have always valued, and it's that these faculty have the weapons they need in that battle. They have peer-reviewed content. They have validated information. It's I think we're in great shape in that dispute.
Unless you're an adjunct. Friends, I hate to pause this, but we are over the hour. We have had a tidal wave of fantastic ideas. My notepad file is just bulging right now, and we've had people from all over the place, from university presses, from libraries, from faculty to technologists. I wanted to thank everybody for such terrific ideas. This has been like a giant think tank that's been roiling and going back and forth. Sam, you just joined us. We have time for one quick comment from you, if you unmute yourself.
Sure. I think it was interesting having read that Times Herald article about what the barriers to change are. I think it's kind of interesting. I'm not sure if it totally matches, but to contrast it and compare it to this weaponized sort of attacks. Now it's almost at an industrial scale on professors who step outside of the boundaries. Professors being targeted by these sort of campus reform style websites, and that are being they'll find some soundbite and then marshal all these forces to go after them until trying to force the university to repudiate them. So there is this, I think, danger of, yes, we sort of the instructors are playing it too safe, but for some professors, especially people who are coming from marginalized groups, women, people of color, queer, and so forth, they have very good reason to be fearful about stepping too far outside the boundaries, because they're real and present danger to being too publicly sort of out there in what they say and what they do and what they try. So we should be wary about being too admonishing of faculty, and some of them didn't deserve it, but some of them are responding to very real sort of existential and physical threats that are being marshaled against them in very, very deliberate ways.
So there's foolishness, but then there's also fear of
legitimate fear of reprisal that extends beyond the institution itself, as a way to sort of undercut the entire academic enterprise for all sorts of reasons. So that's all I have.
I think what that really points out is, if it's fear, why does that fear exist? And it might exist. We might say, I don't want to look silly in front of my students. But if looking silly in front of my students has real consequences, maybe not even physical danger or the like that Sam is talking about, and I don't discount those at all because they're very real. But if they have the danger of, not getting tenure or those sorts of things, those are real dangers for people. And so I think it's easy to stop with because there are probably also some faculty who are innovating. And so I think what's also interesting, and one of the things I find frustrating with that article, although I get that wasn't its point, which is I'd like to see the comparative. So who manages to overcome the fear of being silly or looking like, when does that happen? And what are the conditions for that? Because I feel like, it's too easy to say let's just look at these individual faculty, but they are all existing in systems and structures that are impacting them.
Yes.
Right.
Oh, this is, I I think this is the germ for an entire other session, because we have a lot of ground to cover on this. And I'm really grateful for bringing all this in. Let me just circle quickly back to Greg's point about faculty having the tools. We certainly do. We have really, really powerful universities. We have an enormous scholarly apparatus, and we have now a burgeoning field of rethinking pedagogy. So we have a lot of strengths, and it's important to hold on to that. But while I'm talking about holding on, I'm afraid we have to let go. We are right at the end of the hour. And I just want to say, again, thank you to everybody. What did you think of this experiment? Was this a good thing to try? Was this useful for you? Please let us know either by email me or on Twitter, or if you have a minute now, say something in your chat box or in the raise your, on the question marks, because we have the possibility of doing this again. I'm going to follow this up with a blog post summarizing what we talked about, but I think this is really, really exciting. Just looking ahead, 2 points for next week. One is that we're following up with our exploration of the future of the learning management system with the awesome Martin de Gaimas. So he is the founder, the creator of Moodle, as we saw from Phil's session, one of the 2 leading global learning management systems. So we'll have his brain for an hour to figure out where Moodle, open source LMS is, and where the LMS is going as a whole. So please stay tuned for next week. We're really proud to have Martin on board. And also for next week, just you guys get the first news of this. Our next book in our online book club is the science fiction novel Rainbow's End by Werner Vinge, the greatest science fiction novel in the past generation, devoted to what could happen with education. So we'll be reading that over the next month or so. Now, if you'd like to learn more about the Future Trends Report, you can go to ftte.us. If you want to learn more about this, and if I don't see you, we'll see you next time. And thank you all for coming. Bye.